Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Luke Mon Nation, the most dangerous show on social media on Black Power Media. If that's where you're watching, the most dangerous platform on social media. And if you're watching on all the other places where this is streamed, thank you so much for joining me. This is Jackie Lukeman. Thank you so much for joining me on another Friday evening. I know it's been a minute since I've done a show. Y'all know I've got a lot going on, but we could not let this Friday go without talking about a very important topic that is very critical to the economics of Black folks. So we had to talk about Biden's student loan forgiveness, Black economically speaking. And for that, of course, as always, we are happy to be joined by our resident expert in economics, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. But before we get to that, I want to once again thank you for joining me tonight. If you are watching on Black Power Media, please subscribe. Click on the notification bell to make sure you receive all notifications for when anyone uploads content, goes live. You don't miss anything. You can also support Black Power Media on patreon.com/Black Power Media. Yes, you get patron perks from us on Black Power Media, all kinds of stuff. And I promise you, I don't intentionally avoid doing those. They just do them during the week when I am working my real job, because I actually have one of those. So, but I will do better with contributing to the patron perks. But you can also support Luke Mon Nation on patreon.com/Luke Mon Nation, where I also have patron perks. And you can follow Black Power Media on Twitter, Black Power MED, the number one, Luke Mon Nation on Twitter, LUQMANNATION, the number one, Facebook, all that kind of good stuff. Yes, enough of that. Look here. I'm still angry at this student loan thing. Even after my own little student loans were actually axed out. But I think we need to get into why we should still be angry at the insufficiency of this student loan forgiveness gambit that Joseph Robinette Biden has given us. And for that, I am happy to be joined by Dr. Linwood Tauheed, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Dr. Tauheed, it is good to see you again, my friend. Thank you for joining me.
It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me again.
Well, it's not an invitation. This is your spot now.
Thank you.
So, okay, let's jump into this, because as we know, Joseph Biden announced that he would cancel $10,000 in federal student loan debt, $20,000 if you went to college on Pell Grants. That has taken into effect. I know that because the first time I checked my Fed loan servicing account for the first time in about 6 years because I wasn't giving them people that money back anyway. And it's not there anymore. I literally don't have an account. It's not there. So
Mhm.
yes, okay, great, yay me. But here's the thing, Dr. Tauheed. I have two cousins who one just finished uh, her graduate studies, I
Mhm.
believe, and one is in a master's program, I think.
Mhm.
They both have six-figure student loan debt.
Yeah.
I have a dear friend who is staying with me now, um, six figures student loan debt.
Mhm.
A couple of other friends of mine, one graduated law school, another in some another type of graduate program, six figures. So I didn't finish college. I really, because I'm cheap, Dr. Tauheed. Let me just be honest. I'm cheap. And once tuition became began to be $300 to $500 per credit hour,
Mhm.
and I was paying 1,500, 1,700, $2,000 per class.
Mhm.
That didn't include the books, and I wasn't even living on campus. I was grown, had my own house. I'm looking at one class and saying, I don't think it's worth this kind of money, particularly since I grew up when I graduated from high school in 1985. Tuition was maybe, I don't know, 500 bucks a class, certainly less than 1,000 at most colleges and universities across this country. So people my age at that time could work part-time waiting tables or whatever. I worked at a pharmacy for a while and paid tuition, and my mom paid some of the tuition at the time. So I remember college being not as expensive as it
Mhm.
had become. And I just really started feeling like I was getting ripped off for that,
Mhm.
2000, $2,500 per class tuition. So I was just like, these people are not so smart that I need to be paying them to tell me what they know when I can just read it myself, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's great that that I don't have to deal with this, the student loan that I had with, if I remember, it was about $12,000. Like I said, I wasn't going to pay it back anyway. um, but I mean, that's great. But this, I don't feel celebratory for any of the people I just told you about, and
Mhm.
who I'm sure you know, some of whom are probably your students, who
Mhm.
have high five-figure, six-figure
Mhm.
student loan debt. So
Mhm.
I really want to get into tonight the truth about the student loan forgiveness, the myths about it, and honestly the marketing, because I feel like the Democrats have done a great job marketing this thing,
Mhm.
and selling folks a bill of goods that kind of creates this class tension that we don't need, but that the Democrats do,
Mhm.
and that certainly doesn't meet the needs of the people. So let me stop talking and give me your top line thoughts about Biden's student loan relief program.
Yes, Sister Jacqueline, you've raised a number of issues that hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about this evening. One, as you were just talking, I made a note that one of the issues, that one of the questions you've raised is college education worth it? There's an idea among economists that ordinary people, everyday people, anyone can make a cost benefit analysis on the spot about the money they're going to be spending today as a cost as to the benefit is going to bring them in the future. And that if we make that calculation and we decide that the benefit is going to be less than the cost, we don't do that. So if you apply that to going to college, the idea is that we can, decide to pay tuition now, and we think about how much that's going to be for us. But we're looking forward into the future, and we're saying, okay, getting that college degree is going to get us a job or a promotion or allow us to earn enough money to pay that loan beyond what we would have earned if we had not gone to college, right? That the benefit is greater. That was a pretty good calculation in the 1960s, in the 1970s, because tuition was very low. In many states and in many situations, you could go to college, and your tuition would be pretty much near zero. And if you had Pell Grants or any other kind of things, that would cover your tuition.
Mhm.
You could go to college and not have to pay anything. So if you have zero cost, then it's worth it to do so.
Sure.
Since the 1960s, the cost of college has gone up dramatically. Certainly since the 1980s. If we look at an inflation calculator for college tuition, and we put this in what we consider, you have an index year of $2014, right? What it would cost in 2014. In 1964, college tuition, going to college would cost you about $2,000 per year. In 2014, 40 years later, it's $8,000 per year, right? That's in 2014 dollars, so that $8,000 is in that year. If we look at that in terms of income comparisons, just not going back to the 60s, just going back to 1990s, and I'm reading some figures from a report that I'm going to talk about later. In 1990, median household income compared to college tuition, let's say we put that on a one-to-one basis, right? When we get to 2015, 25 years later, it's 1 to 2.5. That is, going to college is now 2.5 times comparison to median income what it was in 1990. Median income in that sense, by that, has risen in terms of dollars, but in terms of real median income, it's fallen behind in the ability for people to pay for college. The cost of college has increased 2.5 times the increase for median income, making it not only much more expensive to go to college, but that cost benefit calculation of saying it's going to cost me so much now, but I'll get it back in the future. That's
Mhm.
gone because you won't get it back for most situations. Now, if you are a highly paid graduate, a doctor or a lawyer, and not all doctors and lawyers are highly paid, but if you're
Right.
highly paid and you've paid those tremendous tuition payments, and you've more than likely had to get a loan, you are in the six-figure loan area, maybe double, multiple six figures. And if you're a doctor, for example, doctors have to pay those loans back, and so they have to charge high fees. They have to have high incomes in
Mm.
order to pay those loans back. And so that increase in tuition not only affects them in terms of their indebtedness, but it also affects their patients in terms of the cost that they will have to pay for services from that physician. And if you have insurance, then of course it's not like it's free. You're paying higher premiums to get the physician service. And so that high tuition, that cost of tuition, radiates throughout the economy in terms of the cost of everything else. We all pay the cost of high tuition.
Well, I mean, just for a second, I just had this thought that sounds a lot like what they always say trickle down economics is,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
the only thing that's actually trickling down is the
Is the
cost.
pain. Yeah, the cost trickles down. All the benefit rises up as if it's lighter than air. It goes up to the top, and all the other stuff rolls downhill. I won't use the term, but it rolls downhill. And so the idea of is it worth it makes no, would it made some sense before, but it's making no sense today, and it will increasingly make no sense. So that puts the Biden loan forgiveness in a context that says, okay, you're forgiving $10,000, and we can talk about that, but that doesn't lower the cost of tuition.
Mm.
And in fact, one of the arguments that's made for the increased cost of tuition was the student loan financial institutions pushing student loans. And so when a student goes to college and they can't pay the tuition, the loan arranger can say, well, don't worry about it. Here's some money. You can go to college now,
Hmm.
which encouraged universities, colleges and universities to increase their tuition because they believe their students could get a loan to pay for it. In this case, forgiving student loans may incentivize universities to actually increase their tuition even more.
Oh my God.
And so we have a systemic problem here in at least these two parts: high interest rates and loans of high tuition, and then the other part is the incentivizing of universities to take advantage of that loan forgiveness to actually increase their tuition. We have that problem, and so we have to do something about decreasing the cost of college. I work at a university, and it's not a secret among faculty at university that administrative inflation sizes have gone out of proportion to faculty. We have very few increases in number of faculty, but administrators are all over the place, and they make lots of money. And so the high cost of tuition has not gone to professors; it's gone to administrators.
Wow.
At many colleges, there are more administrators than there are teaching faculty. And then on the other side, of course, we have adjunct faculty who are teaching, many of them full time, but getting paid very little.
So so Dr. Tauheed, this exorbitant tuition is not
Mhm.
going. You mean to tell us these exorbitant tuition fees are not going to line the pockets of fat cat liberal professors in
There,
these colleges and universities that are cramming kids' heads with critical race theory and all kinds of stuff?
yeah, yeah. It's not that the university professors are making lots of money in this. Now, when you mentioned that, I'm going to mention an economist during our talk here by the name of Larry Summers.
Hmm.
You're familiar with him. Now, Larry Summers makes a lot of money,
Oh, a lot.
but Larry Summers is also connected to finance, and
Hmm.
so it's in his interest to push student loans or to have the government not forgive student loans because the people who pay him lots of money, not just the universities, but also these financial institutions. That's their bread and butter. And so he's out making statements about, not forgiving more than 10,000 or even that much. And we can talk about that. But no, the money is not going into the pockets of fat cat professors. But it is going to administrators at universities. And some of these college professors or college presidents and chancellors are making in the millions of dollars in
Wow.
terms of salary. So,
Oh my gosh. So let's get into this particular uh
mhm.
stunt that Biden pulled because
Yeah.
look, again, I'm glad of folks who had their student loan debt wiped out.
Hmm.
That's great. But there are so many more people who did not.
Hmm.
And as Sean Blackman says on the show all the time, we say this all the time. Joseph Biden wakes up every single day
Mm-hmm.
and consciously decide, he makes a conscious decision not to cancel student loan debt, not to cancel all of it.
Yeah.
He sits there and he and his advisors and his yes men and yes women
Mm-hmm.
come up with all kinds of arguments
Mm-hmm.
for why he isn't going to, shouldn't,
Right.
and will never cancel all of the student loan debt. And it's not, those reasons do not include because we can't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we talked about before, I think last week on maybe I think it was one of the Remix morning shows, if the Pentagon cancels the contract for
Mm-hmm.
the F-35 fighter jet,
Mm-hmm.
that is $1.7 trillion in savings right there.
Right. Right.
Cancels that student loan debt. If the Pentagon was made to pay that
Mm-hmm.
40 something trillion dollars that they have lost,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
can't account for, don't know where it is, slid into
Mm-hmm.
the what is the courtyard in the middle of the Pentagon under the benches somewhere, nobody knows where it is. If the Pentagon were made to pay that money back to the government, that
Mm-hmm.
$40 trillion would pay that $1.7 trillion in student loan debt at least 35, 36 times over.
Yeah. We could return back to free education,
Right.
college education, and and
Mm-hmm.
and we should look at education in general, from kindergarten through graduate school, as an investment as opposed to a cost.
Mm, mm-hmm.
The argument that you don't want to pay for education, there are lots of arguments that people on the right, including Joe Biden,
Yeah.
want to make about not making education free. One of the arguments is, if we make college education free today, we're spending our children's inheritance. We're spending money today that our children could get in the future. And I argue that if we don't spend money on education today, our children will be dumb as a box of rocks and won't be able to hold on to any money that they may have from us in the future. Education is an investment in our children, and what parent would say, I don't want to invest in my children now. I'll wait till they're adults and give them the money that I saved on education. Who would do that to their children? That's child abuse.
I mean, I think the argument can certainly be made that the United States is
Mhm.
already a country full of adults that could qualify as being very close to dumb as a box of rocks, and I think that's an insult to rocks. I just think it just I'm
Yeah,
so sorry about that, rocks. But I
yeah.
think I agree with you that unless we do something about this education crisis, because it is an
Hmm.
education crisis,
Yes.
but it's
Hmm.
an education crisis that was created for capitalist exploitation, like
Right.
every other crisis that
Hmm.
exists in this country.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, but so, like, if we don't address this crisis, then it will get worse, it being the level of intellectual ability, acuity, and engagement
Hmm.
that the next few generations of folks will have. And
Right.
as frightening as the adult population is, as far as what they don't know in this country right now,
Hmm.
it's terrifying to think of another generation of folks
Hmm.
knowing even less than them. But we're on that path. So
Absolutely.
what do people need to know about Biden's student loan debt forgiveness? Because let me go into some of the questions, because I think this is
Hmm.
a good place to answer some questions. So, is the $10,000 a one-time occurrence? For example,
Hmm.
an
Hmm.
incoming sophomore college student has incurred a debt of $13,000 for their freshman year. The 10,000 forgiveness is applied to the 13,000 despite the greater amount of loans they
Yeah.
will incur for the next 3 years. How does
Yeah.
this work?
That $10,000 is a one-time occurrence. It is a one-time forgiveness of $10,000 of whatever loans you will have. Now, I'm not sure that that student would be eligible for a $10,000 loan forgiveness until they graduate.
What?
I'm
Wait,
not.
stop.
Excuse me. Until they either graduate or are no longer attending school. It's probably the case that their $10,000 of their current loan would be forgiven, but that is a one time occurrence.
Wait a minute. Hold on.
Now, don't quote me. I'm not. Uh,
My,
uh, I'm not so sure, but it is a one time occurrence. I do know that it is only
and,
a one time occurrence.
and see, I think this raises one of my many issues with this stunt. There
Mm-hmm.
are things like that that are very basic. That's a very basic kind of thing that we should know.
Mm-hmm.
Should be very clear.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it not clear whether current students qualify for this $10,000 forgiveness? That's
It's not clear because this whole thing is a stunt. It is a
mm,
political stunt. Joe Biden in his campaign promised to forgive at least $10,000. Now, others, Bernie Sanders and others, were arguing for Elizabeth Warren was arguing for $50,000. Bernie Sanders was arguing for complete and total forgiveness. So everybody on the quote left in the Democratic Party was arguing for more than Biden. So he said at least $10,000. Okay, then he gets into office, and we're looking for him to at least to do his campaign pledge. And the Biden administration starts to make up excuses like, well, I don't know if the president actually has the authority to do that, right? And we've got a commission that's looking into the law. Now the law that was passed by Congress
mhm,
that governs student debt, particularly federal loans, not private loans, federal student loan, gives the Department of Education the complete authority to do anything with indebtedness that it wants to do, including canceling all of it.
mhm,
But the Biden administration, for many months, maybe even up to a year, was saying that we don't know if we have the authority to cancel anything. Well, I would say that if you have the authority to cancel $10,000 is not written in the law. You can cancel
right.
10,000, you can cancel 50,000, you can cancel all of it because
Mm.
the Department of Education has the authority to cancel loans, the federal loans. Private loans are a different thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was my next question.
yeah,
So this forgiveness applies to federal student loans
that's correct.
and students who went to college on federal Pell Grants.
Right.
What what
Well, not
what
none of
about
grants because grants didn't create an indebtedness, right?
yeah,
Now,
so then
those
I think that's the third
who went to
question.
school on 12 on Pell Grants can get an extra $10,000 in forgiveness of their loans.
Okay.
Now, you remember it used to be a time when Pell Grants would pay all of your tuition.
That's what I because people that's what I remember.
Right.
And people were asking, wait, I didn't know you had to pay Pell Grants back. And I
No, no,
said, what? I didn't think you did, but I don't know what happened. So what
no.
happened?
Yeah, you didn't have to pay 12 Pell. You don't have to pay Pell Grants back, but the Pell Grants were limited in terms of their ability to support your tuition payments. So, for example, in the 60s, if you went to college in the 60s and you got a Pell Grant, that Pell Grant was more than your tuition. You could pay for books
Hmm.
on your with your Pell Grant. But I'm thinking somewhere around the 1980s, Pell Grant numbers amounts were decreasing while tuition was going up. So your Pell Grant no longer covered your entire tuition,
Wow.
and so many students then had to take loans. The loans are you have to pay back. The grant part you don't have to pay back. But in this provision, if you went to school on a Pell Grant, I assume that meant if you have a loan in addition to the Pell Grant, you don't have to pay the Pell Grant back, but you can get an extra $10,000
Okay.
in loan
Okay.
forgiveness.
All
Now,
right.
of
Thanks
course,
for clearing that up. That was very confusing to me.
yeah, there's a means testing to this.
Of
You have to
course.
earn less than 125,000 to be eligible, or 250,000 as a couple. For most people who are have grants, who have loans, that $125,000 is not going to be a problem. Most people are going to be below that.
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about doctors and lawyers who have income
Mm-hmm.
higher than that. If you have an income higher than that, even though you may have $250,000 in loans, you don't even get a $10,000 payoff
Mm.
or reduction. Right now, total student loan debt in this country is about 1.7 trillion. You've mentioned that
Mm.
before.
The
About
cost of that
92.
one F-35 fighter jet that doesn't work,
Right.
that they're still going to build. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, about 92% of that loan is federal loans. So that's about $1.5 trillion dollars of that is federal loans. The other 0.2 trillion is private loans. Okay. And so one of the things about means testing is means testing makes programs politically more difficult to accept, because it's not because anyone says, well, everyone above who's earning above 125,000, you got enough money to pay the loans. Is that the political support from persons who make lots of money disappears if they're going to be left out. There's
Mm-hmm.
there's, there's a selfishness there among people who make lots of money. I'll say that. Yeah,
You
that
think?
that they don't want those who make less than them to even get any kind of forgiveness if they're left out. So one of the kind of the political tricks that, for example, someone like a Joe Manchin, who this means testing was put in because of Joe Manchin. Joe
Wait,
Manchin
Joe
said,
Manchin had his fingers in this too?
"Oh, absolutely." He said, "I'll support it, but it has to be means tested. We don't want to give $10,000 or any loan forgiveness to people who earn lots of money." And usually with many programs that ends up reducing the political support for that program, and in many cases it will get killed. This didn't happen this time because the Democrats are desperate in this situation of wanting to show that they've done something
Mm.
for their voters. $10,000 is something, but it is not enough. It is very little, and all the arguments all the arguments that people are making. A couple of economists, Larry Summers being one of them, that there will be disastrous economic effects of forgiving more than that, or all of it. We can talk about these arguments are false. They're fallacious.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about the arguments, the myths and the marketing of this thing. We got
Hmm.
a question in the chat from We Out. Does this need to pass the legislation? No, this is done.
Yeah,
This is
this
done.
is this.
We were just talking about how this is an executive order and how the Department of Education can do this.
Right.
That's how the
Yeah,
law is already written. The Department of
right.
Education can cancel all the debt if they feel like it.
Yeah, and the means testing is done by executive order also. So the president, the Department of Education, with the president's authority, of course, has the ability to forgive any amount of student loans. They've forgiven, for example, student loans from institutions like ITT,
Mm-hmm.
these
The
educational institutions that have made claims that you come and you pay $40,000 will get you a job as a dental technician, and then they don't come through.
right.
They make these false claims, and many people have been ripped off in these processes, and so they've forgiven that. If I remember the number, it's about $80 million of
That's
forgiveness
about right.
for these kinds of fraudulent loans that were made, or at least fraudulent claims. They can do that on a daily basis. They could forgive $80 million on every day with every new category of person until they forgive the whole $1.5 trillion. But
Hmm.
they're holding back.
Yep.
Um,
Oh, Gannibal has a question. Does this mean those making $125,000 are receiving more tax cuts next tax season?
no, they're not receiving any more tax cuts than they're already receiving. Um, um, uh, They're just not a beneficiary of this process.
Mm,
You know.
yeah. So let's get into some of the myths and some of the marketings, particularly Dr. Tauheed, when it comes to Black folks, what this
Mhm.
means for Black folks. Now, I will admit, and I'm gonna be very honest about this. I think this is fantastic. This $10,000 or $20,000 is fantastic for people who graduated college or didn't graduate college, are and who are I can't even say middle class because who knows what that is anymore. I don't even know
Mhm.
what that number is anymore. But
Mhm.
for working class and poor folks who are carrying student debt, if this stunt wiped out their student debt,
Mhm.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. However, I think the benefit that those people received from this has been oversold in epic proportions. And let me show
Mhm.
you what I mean. So there, I just happen to be perusing Twitter. I don't do it often because Twitter to me is a cesspool. So I don't mess around with Twitter too much
Mhm.
because bothers me. Let me see if I can get this one to let me pull it down here. Here we go. I think that'll work. Doot, doot. So this lady on Twitter, Ann Peterson,
Mhm.
she tweeted the 10 to 20,000 debt cancellation isn't enough, but it's the beginning. And sharing stories of how it's dramatically changing people's lives helps garner the support to push the movement even further. And these are the basics, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to get into some of these stories in a minute, but I'm trying to find the other thing that I a screenshot,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to uh, pull this thing up. Let me see if I can grab it. Window, is that you? Oh, you're not going to do it for me. Nope, not that one. There. Let me see. Let me try that one. And it's still not wanting to do it. Hmm. Sorry, folks, having really annoying technical difficulties here. All right, I'm just going to read what the tweet says.
Mhm.
So this person quoted this Ann Helen Peterson, retweeted her tweet and said in their tweet, Dominique Baker said, I cried today on a very official phone call when I heard that the simulation numbers showed that around 500,000 Black people would be moved from negative to positive net wealth. She's saying, just the
Okay.
look on your face.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help it.
I just
I
love
couldn't help it.
then see, and now I feel better because when I read that tweet, I'm pretty sure I said I did the same thing, but I said some other choice words. She literally is saying that this $10,000 to $20,000 student loan debt forgiveness, some simulation she was looking
Uh-huh.
at showed that the 500,000 Black people would be moved from negative to positive net wealth because of this student loan forgiveness stunt. Make it make sense, Dr. Tauheed, because
Let me pull back my reaction and say it's if we're looking at net wealth as assets minus liabilities, and debt is part of your liability. So if you owe a certain amount of money, now your debt is $10,000 less, then I guess technically, yeah, you might move from negative net wealth, if your net wealth was negative $5,000, to a positive $5,000 because of $10,000 less debt. I suppose that's an important thing. Uh, what it does mean, and here's a number. About 15 million people owe $10,000 or less. That's about a third of borrowers who owe $10,000 or less. So this will wipe out the debt for about a third of those who owe, right? But the average owed is $37,000. So that will still leave the average at 27,000 for those who qualify. Everyone who owes 37,000 won't qualify. Okay.
Mhm.
And there's some numbers if we're talking about and we should be talking about the distribution of borrowing. There's some numbers that are coming out of a report that was done 2018 by some colleagues of mine at UMKC and at the Levy Institute in New York and others. Whites. These are the numbers for college graduating seniors. About 67% of white graduating seniors had student debt, right?
Mhm.
They owed an average of $29,065. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, of black graduating seniors, 84% had student debt. So a higher percentage of black graduating seniors have student debt. They owed an average of $33,015. So black graduating seniors owe more than white graduating seniors. Hispanic, which we understand can be of any race. 71, well, about 72% of them had student debt, and they averaged about 29,517, less than a little more than whites, but less than blacks. And so blacks are owe more of in student loans on average than whites, and a higher percentage of black graduates have student loan debt. Uh, a fewer now we don't have the numbers here, but the graduation rate for black college students is lower than the graduation rate for white college students. But I would imagine those who do not graduate, the statistics are still pretty much the same. Blacks owe more student debt even if they don't graduate, and a
Mhm.
higher percentage of black students have student debt. And so there is a greater stress, if you will, on the black community from student debt. Now, I mentioned that the average student debt owed is $37,000. That's more than students, of course, owe when they graduate,
Mhm.
because even when they pay their loans back, there are interest payments. There's interest that gets added to the loan. So
Let's
you
talk
have
about
many,
that.
many, many people who owe many times their debt, what they graduated or left college owing, because they have not been able to find jobs that pay enough to pay back the student loans to overcome the interest payments. That's back to our original discussions about cost benefit analysis. Your
Mhm.
loan is costing you more than you earn over your lifetime, and it's not a good deal. Now, if you are a country, the U.S., if the country wants to invest in its future, again, education is the way to do that. Most European countries, at least so far, have higher education, have education systems that are free, even through college, and some through graduate school, and for even doctors and lawyers. Most quote advanced nations have those kind of provisions because they understand that education is an investment. The Chinese also, of course, have that provision, and will in fact pay students to come to the U.S. to go to college. And investment in education is important. And this country, because it has so much class and race and gender antagonism,
Mhm.
persons are not wanting others to get ahead of them, and so they're
Mm.
sabotaging the entire system. I guess that's another discussion in terms of how capitalism creates antagonism and competition between people who should be working together, if you will, and causes a disruption of the interest of the future interests of persons because everyone is fighting for the crumbs, or not
And you know
everyone,
what?
most are
Well,
fighting for the crumbs. Yes.
yeah, yeah, and that I think that that is kind of what I was thinking that this stunt also is. It
Mhm.
is a wedge issue. It is being
Mhm.
used as a wedge issue, I think, by the Democrats. I mean, because these are not unintelligent people. They may be, they're terrible, and they may be clueless as to how the rest of us live, but they are not unintelligent people. They're not unaware of what they're doing. And I
Mhm.
think they know very well that this creates a wedge
Right.
between in between folks who benefited from
Mhm.
this policy and folks who have not benefited from this policy
Mhm.
and folks who may have benefited from this policy and are calling this policy out for the insufficient and insulting political stunt that it is. And
Yeah.
instead of there being
I don't know if you can hear me, Sister Jacqueline, but you're frozen on my end. Uh, no, I'm still. I think I'm still here. I think. Well, um, I don't know if Sister Jacqueline is going to be back, and I don't know if you can hear me, please just put a I guess something in the chat or as a question. I'll know I'm still online.
all right, we are back. I
We're back. Yeah.
apologize for that a little um, router disruption there, but all good. So what were we saying? What was I saying?
We were
So
talking about how even Democrats are making arguments in terms of kind of dividing people in terms of their opinion. I mentioned Larry Summers. Larry Summers is a former economist, former Secretary of the Treasury under Bill Clinton, so he served in Democratic administrations. Jason Furman is a former economic advisor to President Obama. Both of them, as Democrats, have come out against any forgiveness, not just 10,000, but any forgiveness, with arguments that one that it it Larry Summers' argument is that this antagonizes people who didn't get a chance to go to college,
Hmm.
because you have persons who've gone to college and have paid who have debt, who will have debt forgiven. But if you didn't get a chance to go to college, you're not having your debt forgiven. That's an argument that essentially discredits or devalues the value of education as an investment.
Hmm.
If you've gone to college and you've graduated, or even if you've just gone and taken some courses and you've gone out to the workforce, you've become more productive as a result of that. Your productive adds to the total productive capacity of the country. And so persons who have not had an opportunity to go to college actually have benefited from the increased productivity of persons who have gone to college.
Hmm.
Economies rise and fall together, if you will. It may not always expand equally. Some at the top expand a lot faster than those at the bottom. But every economy, every society is grows as a result of the knowledge base of its people. And so even if you've not had an opportunity to go to college, you've benefited from let's say the innovation and so forth. I mean that's come from those who have gone to college, who have had advanced degrees to build computers and cell phones and so forth. You may not have gone to college, you may not have the knowledge to do that, but you've benefited from that process.
Hmm.
Again, education is investment. Larry Summers is also arguing that this will add to inflation. That study done by my colleagues some years ago concludes, and it was a very detailed economic simulation, concludes that there will be minimal inflationary effects of canceling student loans. And the reason is this: money is not being added into the system.
Hmm.
Money that would have gone to banks and finance companies is now able to go elsewhere. You're not adding any new money, you're just redirecting old money, which means it has no reason to have an inflationary effect. There are those who are arguing that canceling student debt antagonizes those who have already paid off their student
Oh
loans.
yeah. Hmm.
I find that argument really silly. It's like telling your children, I've got a car outside and it's really snowing, and I could drive you to school. But when I was your age, I had to walk to school 10 miles in the snow, and honey, you got to walk 10 miles too.
So you
You
get
know,
out there and get the
you
truck.
get out there and do it. We can't make things better for you because it was hard for me. Okay, you had to pay, and don't you want your children to be able to get a better education and live their lives and so forth? You want to make it as hard for them. That's really silly. And remember, there was a time when education was so inexpensive, it was almost like not having to pay. It has become expensive because finance has driven this. And one of the things that we should remember in this process that is not being discussed is that, and let me go to my notes here so I make sure I don't misquote this. In 1976, there was a act that was passed called the Higher Education Act. In that act, Senator Joe Biden sponsored and put in a provision that made it no longer possible for student loan debt to be discharged in bankruptcy.
Hmm.
Right now, businesses could continue to discharge their debt in bankruptcy if they get to a position where they can't pay off their debt. But students were not able to do so. Donald Trump could go into bankruptcy 6 or 7 times, but
Hmm.
but you, if a student, if you can't pay your debt, you can no longer go into bankruptcy, and that was courtesy of Joseph Biden as a senator. And so the huge part, a significant part of the student debt crisis, owes itself to Biden's actions as a senator, and he should be embarrassed, if not ashamed, not to overcome that by canceling all student debt.
Yeah, this I just pulled up an article. It is more than 2 years old, but it is accurate because
Hmm.
Joseph Biden has been in Congress in the Senate for 458 years. He's actually 40 years, but yeah, this is he did all of that.
Hmm.
Uh, um, they go into the roots of the student loan crisis. They talk about the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act that was passed in
2005.
2005, which was the follow up to um, the 1976 Higher Education Act that you mentioned, Dr. Tauheed.
Right,
And the 2005 Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act made it even more difficult than the
right,
original legislation made it to dispatch student loan debt. And
right.
Biden was
Supported that.
involved in that too.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Joseph Biden was not called the senator from MBNA for no reason.
The senator from MBNA.
Well, Delaware, at the state he represented, was is a state where many corporations incorporate, because Delaware is the first state, and therefore it has the least regulations in terms of corporate oversight. Every other state, as they have has built on Delaware's corporate oversight, and have added things that are not in the Delaware provision. So MBNA is headquartered in Delaware, like many banks. And
Hmm.
Joseph Biden did a lot of their bidding, and is, I believe, still doing the bidding of finance and banking. Uh,
Very much so. So we have a
yeah.
question in the chat. Uh, Ricky asked, "How much does this affect interest on loans?
Uh,
This forgiveness."
yeah, I don't think of any reason that interest on loans would be affected by this particular forgiveness. There's no reason that I can think of that interest would go up or down as a result of this. So I say it has no effect on interest rates on these loans. The greater effect on interest rates on loans is happening because of what the Federal Reserve Bank is doing in
Hmm.
raising interest rates in general, which will move us into recession.
Wait,
And if you're not already there, yes,
that oh my gosh, Dr. Tawheed,
yes.
the Democrats really just did this. They really just threw $10,000 to $20,000 at people at the
Hmm.
same time that the Federal Reserve is about to raise interest rates.
Again,
That's going to increase the payments on what's left of people's existing student loans. Oh my God.
well, if you have private loans, if you have federal loans, the interest rates won't go up. But if you have
Okay,
private
the
loans,
interest rates. Okay.
or if you have new federal loans, then the interest rate is going to go up to match that.
Because
So,
I'm
yeah.
just like, I don't understand. I don't understand why I'm not seeing pitchforks and torches. And I'm really wondering what it is going to take, Dr. Tawheed, because these people are not even trying. These people, meaning these politicians, these Democrats, they're not even trying to meet the needs of the people. This is such, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
this is such a terribly insufficient but intentionally insufficient policy.
Right.
Right. And here's the thing that I think blows my mind about this. It is well within, we've already established, it's well within Biden's power to cancel all of the debt.
Yes.
If he did that,
Hmm. Yeah.
then the Democrats would not have to worry about losing an election for at least a generation.
At least that. Look, we have lots of evidence that the student loan crisis is not just a crisis in people having to pay money back. That's not the crisis. It's having widespread socioeconomic effects. For example, Millennials who have gone through this system when student debt crisis has exploded are forestalling marriage. They're putting marriage off because they don't want to enter a relationship with someone else and now have a tremendous amount of debt, right? If you want to get a mortgage, one of the factors that's used to calculate your credit worthiness is your debt to income ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have six figures, if you have let's say $100,000 in debt, and you're making $50,000 a year, your debt to income ratio is 2 to 1. You can't get a loan
Mm-hmm.
with that type of debt, so you can't buy a house. Yeah, home ownership among millennials is falling. Your credit score is affected in general, and so you may have a difficulty just getting credit, or getting loans with your low credit means that your interest rate is going to be higher. Business formation is affected by the fact that one, many people borrow money to go into business, but if you can't borrow, you can't go into business. And so if you can't find a job, but you've graduated from college, you might have an opportunity, if you didn't have the debt, to start your own business. And younger people are wanting to do that at a much higher rate than older folks, but they can't do it because
Mm-hmm.
they can't borrow money. And so there are widespread socioeconomic effects from having high student debt that goes well beyond the ability, just the ability or not ability of people to pay it. It goes out into the future of the country as we go forward. And as we said before, it is a higher burden on Black folks than it is on anyone else in this country. So,
So for those of us who have benefited from this policy, how does this canceling of that debt affect any of the things you just mentioned?
the canceling of the debt for those who have benefited, let's say that 1/3 who have less than 10,000, so all of their debt is wiped out. I would hope it would encourage them to want their peers, their colleagues, to feel the same way. I'm debt free, at least college debt free. I'd want others to be college debt free also. And so I hope it spurs the movement and the pressure on Democrats to forgive all of that loan, cancel the F-35 program, and just wipe out all of that student debt. And you not only will wiping out all of that student debt increase productivity, it's going to increase the ability of people to produce. That money gets redirected through the economy in other ways that helps to grow the economy. So much of the debt payment that goes back, in this case, to the federal government, just goes into programs that are not going to be directed back to the people. You know, you pay off your student debt, that money ends up in a cruise missile over
Mm-hmm.
in some foreign country. You know, being able to direct your money to be able to get loans, to start businesses, to start families, and so forth is what is an investment in the future of this country. Um, to the extent that Democrats want everyday people to do better, they can do better than this.
Mm.
Republicans are different in the sense that they are for big finance, and they are not afraid to say they're for big finance.
Right.
Democrats are trying to hide behind lots of other things. And so they bring out these economists like Summers and Furman to say, we would do this, but it's going to have an effect on inflation. When in fact this inflation is, as we said before, a supply side issue. It's not a demand. It's not like there's too much money. You want to increase supply and make college education free, and so people can graduate and become more productive and increase supply of
Yeah.
things that the Chinese have figured it out, as if it's a secret. Education is what increases productivity.
Right. Right. It's interesting, when I looked at my Fed loan account, like I said, for the first time in like 6 years,
Mhm.
because I wasn't paying it then. And if it weren't, I wasn't going to pay it anyway. So I looked at my Fed loan account, and there was nothing there. And then I hopped on over to Experian, and guess what, Dr. Tauheed? My credit score didn't change.
Uh, well, I can't explain that. Maybe it's late. Maybe it's coming.
So I guess that leads me to the question, going back to this tweet from this woman, and I finally was able to pull it up, um, about creating uh, a positive net
Net
wealth.
worth, yeah,
There we
yeah,
go.
it's going to increase. There is a justification for arguing that debt will go down, and so net wealth will go up. But one of my colleagues, Michael Hudson, says debts that can't be repaid won't be repaid.
Basically.
And so if you are a person who has negative net wealth, you probably are low income. You
Hmm.
probably couldn't afford to pay the loan back anyway, so you weren't going to do that. This doesn't help. This doesn't change. It takes away the debt. It won't improve your income. And being able to discharge that, for example, in bankruptcy would be much more significant for those
Hmm.
persons, and so we need to change that law as well.
Yeah. So let me go down. Let me see if I can go down into this other tweet from Ann Helen Peterson, because some of the things that people posted about the tangible impact that this debt for student loan forgiveness had on them, I think are important, but not
Hmm.
for the reasons people think they're important. Like this one, this one really struck me. No loan payment means more fresh fruit and veg in our fridge,
Hmm.
more books for our boys, and now I can afford to get new clothes too. I'm in total disbelief. On the surface, that's like, oh, yay, this is wonderful.
Hmm.
But then I thought about it, and it's like, shouldn't we all be able to afford fresh fruit and vegetables? And see, we radicals who are pushing for societal change and socialism, this is always the foundation of our argument. Everyone
Hmm.
should be able to afford quality food,
Hmm.
and things like access to quality libraries so that they and their children can have access to all different kinds of education. It shouldn't rely on this one-time political stunt pulled by the
Hmm.
Democrats to get votes right before the midterm,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's that one. This one, I honestly, I don't know what state these people live in where they think that they can think about wealth accumulation in the form of real estate,
Mhm.
because of this $10,000 or $20,000 loan forgiveness. I don't know that economically that even makes sense. Like the financial situation
Mhm.
in regard to real estate in this country, the math doesn't math to me right there.
Well, $10,000, as you said, is better than nothing, but it's not going to change your debt to income ratio significantly to be able to do these kinds of investments and so forth. I mean, it may be good for one particular person. And Helen Peterson sounds like her job is to talk this up, to make it the best thing since sliced bread.
Hmm.
And she's I don't know her. She may be a Democratic operative who's trying to make this sound like it's the greatest thing that's ever happened. For it's $10,000 less, but if you have significant debt, it's not going to change much. Quite, the moratorium on payments has been extended to the end of the year.
Right.
It's been over 2 years, and it's not only a moratorium on payment, but it's also a moratorium on interest added to the debt. For many people, in that 2.5 years, there would have been $10,000 more of interest added to the debt. And so, when this moratorium is gone and interest payments come back, um, uh, you know, that $10,000 of forgiveness will be wiped out. Well, there's a proposal that has been made that doesn't go to full forgiveness, but argues that the principle that you borrowed is what should continue. That all of the interest and fees that have been added to these um, um, debts, that should be completely forgiven. And
Mm-hmm.
and we're talking about interest that the federal government has put on. Over since 2008, many of these large financial institutions have been able to acquire zero or near zero interest loans.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can do that for Goldman Sachs. Why can't we do that for ordinary people? Say you borrowed $10,000, the interest payment, you haven't been able to pay it all, so now you owe 20,000. We'll just wipe that $10,000 off, and we won't charge you any interest. You pay it off as you come along, just like Goldman Sachs can pay off those loans at zero interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
That would go to full forgiveness. If you want to take the moral ground that you borrowed the money, you should have to pay it back. But why should you be in a worse interest situation than a large corporation? There's also, of course, lots of stuff out on Twitter elsewhere about Republicans who are arguing that there should be no debt forgiveness when many of these Republicans have gotten forgiveness on their PPP loans, some into the millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Who are also arguing that, hey, it's immoral to forgive money that people have borrowed. It's the, the,
Yeah, the
the, the hypocrisy of it is. But of course, it's not. You expect that from Republicans.
exactly.
There are many Democrats, of course, who feel the same way.
Exactly. Yeah, the PPP loans that were forgiven in full, many of them. Here's another thing, another tweet, really quickly about it. It's a huge deal for the racial wealth gap, and then she retweets the person who retweeted her. So it's a neat little circle jerk there, and I
Yeah,
and I. And I think I agree with you, Dr. Tauheed. I think that both of these people might be Democratic operatives who
yeah,
are, really all in on the marketing part of this thing, telling these,
hmm hmm
seemingly tear-jerking stories about how, this loan forgiveness really made a difference in people's lives. They can buy fresh food, fresh. They can buy more
yeah,
fresh food. They feel more confident to have children, even though the cost of having a child. I think the Brookings Institute just released a study where the cost of having a child has increased to $18,000 per year,
hmm
which averages out to about $300,000 from birth to 18 years old. I mean, okay, if it makes you, I understand not having this payment over your, hanging over your head. Um, Certainly provides some breathing room, but we still live in an unequal, exploitative, capitalist society that does not provide an environment that is conducive for
hmm
people to live decent lives as human beings.
right.
I mean, at the end of the day, that is the bottom line. This is a political stunt. This is my opinion. This is a
Yeah,
political stunt that the Democrats pulled because they had to say and do something before the midterms in
yeah,
order to stave off losing, being subjected to a bloodbath, which I still
yeah,
think might happen, but maybe a little bit less of a bloodbath now.
yeah. This is the least that could be done,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Democrats, I expect, are hoping that the least that they do will get enough votes to overcome Republicans. This will probably help some. I think the abortion issue, segueing to something else, is going to be a much more significant issue in terms of in terms of voting turnout, particularly among women. And the Democrats are politics becomes this generation of fear,
Mm.
and so the Democrats by the Republicans by having the Supreme Court move into this area before the election may have done something to shoot themselves in the foot. On the other hand, it may energize their base more than it energizes the Democrats. It's a in this political season, everything should be looked upon as political. But of course, political season the season has become 24/7, 365 every for every 4 years. It's a continuous thing.
So, what should we be doing in the meantime, Dr. Tauheed? What should we be doing about this issue and every other issue in regard to organizing politics, regarding economics, instead of depending on the Democrats to bail
Yeah.
us out of any of this? What should we be doing?
Well, look, the NAACP came out with a position that they wanted at least $50,000 of debt forgiveness and more. Right now, I see the NAACP as one of the most conservative organizations in the Black community. But if the NAACP can come out with that position, I think other organizations need to come out with that position as well.
Hmm.
Certainly those who are left of the NAACP, but even other organizations like the Urban League and SCLC and so forth should back that. That those are already organizing units. But then we have also organizing units of others, Movement for Black Lives Matters, and other organizations that are even more left of those, who need to come together and decide on our agenda. And if this is our agenda, we need to be able to make demands on the Democratic Party that this is what we want, and we're not willing to participate in various ways if we don't get it. I think that the strength of any community in a capitalist society has to do with its effect on the business environment. And so it may not be a wise thing for us to say we're not going to come out and vote. Maybe it's better to have Democrats there than it is Republicans there in terms of being in charge. But that's only one place where we can show our power. We can show our power in the economic sphere, in terms of organization, in terms of more union development, in terms of things like thinking about non-payment strikes. There are persons who are organizing, saying that even when the moratorium is off in December, they're not going to pay their student loans.
Hmm.
More of that kind of organizing, which gets to payment systems, particularly pressure on businesses to provide. What we talk about, this level of inflation that's coming, that has a supply chain issue that's driving it. But also part of that is large corporations are taking advantage of this inflation to increase the price of their products greater than their costs. Organizing around those issues and that's an organization that can happen not only on the left but also on the right, in terms of issues as we organize, as opposed to organize around personalities. I'm hoping that this process that we're going through with all of the other existential crises, climate change and other kinds of things, will help organizing around issues as opposed to personalities. And you said you wonder why there's not rioting in the street. Well, in Europe, there's going to be rioting in the streets as a
Hmm.
result of the effect that the sanctions are having on Europe, as opposed to sanctions against Russia are having
Right.
on Europe.
Hmm.
And as things become more drastic, as winter comes along and heating oil is non-existent or very costly, I think we'll see lots of political action in Europe. I'm hoping that this situation in the U.S. will become as well organized for things like student debt forgiveness, and you mentioned cancellation of the F-35 program. F-35s don't work. They don't even work.
Right. Right.
And so it should be a no-brainer to transfer that money into student debt forgiveness. But there are other kinds of things in terms of just production of food, clothing, and shelter. These other kinds of basic needs that are being drastically affected by the supply chain and climate change and other kinds of things, so that everyday people began to exercise their economic power, their ability to buy or not buy things in the economy, to send messages to quote the elites that things are not going to be the same as they always have been. We've had enough. The question is, have we had enough? that's
Right. That's the
that's
question.
the
And I
question.
think one little tidbit that I'm going to leave you all with to take away as you ask that question of yourselves, have you had enough? The elites, the corporate bosses, you want to know what their profit margin was in the last quarter of this year, the second quarter of 2022? $2 trillion in 3 months. That was
Mm-hmm.
their profit in just 3 months, the
Mm-hmm.
last 3 months of this year. While the politicians claim we are in a recession,
Mm-hmm.
that they continue to claim that is our fault, the fault of the working class and the poor, because we want things, because we demand things.
Mm-hmm.
The corporations, the CEOs, the boards of directors, they made $2 trillion. No, they didn't make $2 trillion. They stole $2 trillion of our money.
Mm-hmm.
You tired of it yet? I hope you are. Thank you so much, Dr. Tauheed, for breaking this topic down for us tonight. We appreciate you.
It's always been a pleasure, and the conversation is always right on point. And your listeners, your viewers, I don't know what you call them, they're listening and viewing, always ask great questions, and I'm always happy to be here.
We are always happy to have you. Okay, I think we gotta get this one
Okay.
last question. So We Out says this is where I get confused. On the one hand, org should demand from demos. Then you say we should vote Democrat, I guess. What's the point of the demand if we're just going to vote? This is my perspective.
No, no, no. You're good.
Yeah, this is my perspective, and I've said this several times. We have to understand that most of our people are still, by our people, I mean Black people, working class and poor people. And that includes, indigenous people and Latinx people. Most of our people, our class allies, are still very wedded to the Democratic Party and still very, very wedded to voting.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we think we are going to organize a mass of the working class if we don't meet people where they are? So, yes, we're going to have to deal with people
Yeah.
who believe that the only answer is voting. However, our job as organizers is to provide those people with the political education to understand that they are voting
Mm-hmm.
to prop up a system that does not exist to serve them, even if in the short term they believe they're saving themselves from some immediate pain by like having Republicans in charge as opposed to Democrats,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Now, I also believe that voting can be a tool, but I don't think that's possible. This is just my opinion. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think voting is a tool on the national level for president.
Mm-hmm.
I think voting is a more effective tool at the local level where
Mm-hmm.
we see more immediate results in local offices, school
Mm-hmm.
board, county commissioner, that kind of thing. And you cultivate people from the community
Mm-hmm.
and up through that's my opinion. Voting, as I believe Kwame Ture or Carmichael said, no, I'm sorry, yeah, that voting is a tool.
Mm-hmm.
It is a tool just like every other tool in the revolutionaries toolkit. We'd be fools not to use it understanding that so many of our people are still very invested in it.
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and it calls for some expansive thinking. And it is it's a question that's asked often, and we need to think about it often. I think about it this way: there's a difference between organizing and mobilizing,
Mm-hmm.
and voting is mobilizing. Voting
Mm-hmm.
is saying, let's get people out to do this, vote for this candidate. But you have to organize before, and then you have to continue to organize after. And so, I don't want to throw the baby away with the bathwater by saying in this upcoming November election, let's not get out and vote. Because when Republicans get control, it's a different ballgame, right? And that may happen. But if Democrats, quote, Democrats are still able to have some control, we don't go home and say the Democrats, you guys, you got it. So, listen to us. We continue to organize. And I agree with you that organizing has to come from bottom up. It has to come from local. And so I would like to see every member of Congress and of the Senate who is not certified progressive, and there's a small list of those, we can figure out. I would like to see all of them replaced.
Every
and,
single one.
and you have to do that by voting, but you can't expect to be able to do that if you vote in an election and then go home until the next 2 years. You have to continue to organize. You have to get involved in those local politics, because that's where people learn how to be politicians or representatives. But we also have to do something else. When we elect people at a local level, we have to protect them from corruption.
Oh, that's great. Yes.
And that my experience in that comes because I was a treasurer for a Missouri state representative who became a city council person. And on her first day in office in Jeff City, Missouri, first day in office, a lobbyist came into her office and gave her two checks. The major campaign contribution, the maximum was $350. So he gave her two $350 checks. Now I knew her and knew her character. This wasn't going to affect her in any way. But I'm the treasurer, so I take the checks and I look at them, and I'm seeing something strange. The checks had two different names on them, but the accounts for the checks were the same. And I called the Missouri Ethics Department and said, "This looks strange. This looks like, even though it's got two different names on the checks, that the checking account is the same." And they said, "Well, that's the same entity, and if you take that, then you have gone over the limit. You've made a violation of the law." Now the
Uh-huh.
lobbyist knows that, but this new junior, newly elected representative didn't know that. But what I would so we returned both checks, because what would have happened is this: the lobbyist would have come in a couple of months later, say, "Oh," after the report was filed, and say, "I made a mistake. I shouldn't have given you both of those checks, but don't worry, it's between you and I. By the
Mm-hmm.
way, I have a little favor that I want you to do." And that favor becomes a bigger favor and a bigger favor, and eventually they are captured by the political system. And so we have to not only elect people into office, we have to protect them from being compromised along the way, so that when they do get to the highest offices, we know who they are, and they can't be turned against us.
Mm.
Yeah.
And, there actually are examples of this working,
Hmm.
because we've been talking about what has happened in Colombia.
Yeah.
So it can happen. It can work. It can be done here. We just have to organize, organize,
Organize. Right.
organize. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
Tauheed. Appreciate you. Thank you all for joining me tonight on Lukman Nation. We'll see you again at some point next week. A lot is going on. Stay tuned so you can check out everything that's going on Black Power Media on the channel. Appreciate you. Be really, really good to each other. Be good to yourselves. As always, remember, a luta continua. The struggle continues.
Thank you.
But Victoria acerta. Victory is certain. Peace, y'all.